Good day. I would like to welcome you all from Luxembourg to today's meeting of the European Union ministers in charge of foreign affairs. I would like to thank everyone who is watching us live on M1, on Here TV, or on Facebook. The purpose of today's extraordinary meeting is the tension arising in the world trade, which has emerged in the form of waves in recent days. Therefore, the President of Poland, on behalf of the European Union and the United States, and on behalf of the European Union and China, has set the agenda for today's meeting. Therefore, if you allow me, I would like to first summarize the agenda of trade relations between the European Union and the United States. First of all, it has always been said that in difficult situations it turns out who is suitable for what and who is not suitable for what. In recent years, the European Union has had to go through a number of difficult situations, and this current difficult situation, which has emerged in the field of trade, once again proves that the European Union institutions are not suitable for dealing with difficult situations. This has previously been highlighted in the context of migration, the global pandemic, and the war in Ukraine. Now, in the context of trade difficulties, the institutional behavior of Brussels once again proves that Brussels and the European Union institutions are simply not capable of dealing with difficult situations. Here, even before the conflict between the United States and the European Union, the European Commission made a huge mistake by appointing von der Leyen as president. The European Commission knew exactly, as everyone in the world knew, that in November, the United States elected a president who pursued a patriotic political strategy, which ultimately led to a patriotic economic policy, and one of the tools of this patriotic economic policy was the extradition of the U.S. president. The extradition of the U.S. president is also one of the tools of the patriotic economic policy. For months now, it would have been possible to hold talks with the U.S. administration in Erden, and months ago, it would have been possible to make serious recommendations to the table of the U.S. administration, which could have been determined based on the recommendations. Of course, I know that at the end of the week, a spokesman from the European Commission said that, in contrast to my position, they discussed and wrote down how many times they had discussed. But the situation is that we do not expect Brussels officials to talk to us, we do not expect them to register all of this afterwards, but we expect them to hold successful and fruitful talks in matters that are of critical importance to Europe, the European Union, and the European economy. Successful, serious talks can be held if a person makes a seriously feasible recommendation to the table, and this did not happen on the part of the European Commission. We made a recommendation to the European Commission on what they should do, because we knew exactly how important the future of the American automotive industry is to Donald Trump. And we also knew that the United States has only used 2.5% of its imports so far. In contrast to European automotive products, while we in Europe use 10% of our imports for American car imports, the simple solution was that the European Union would have had to reduce its car imports by 2.5%. Then the American and European car imports would have been on the same level, and this would have provided a basis for negotiations that would have made it possible to remove 20 to 25% of European car imports. We are very sorry that the European Commission did not take this step, and thus avoided the possibility of the European automotive industry being affected. Everything that happened could have been avoided, but now that we are in this situation, it is very important that we should not be in a hurry, and especially that we should not make aggressive measures. We need a strategic calm now, a strategic calm, so that we do not cause even greater harm to the European economy. What we certainly do not support is the trade war and the wham war with the United States. We urged the Commission to forgive the United States in the trade war or the wham war. We do not want high whams, we want low whams. Therefore, we are waiting for the European Commission to discuss, but not the issue of new whams, not even higher whams, but how to reduce whams in the trade war between the United States and the European Union. The European Commission is now preparing wham initiatives that can serve as an answer to the US wham reports. We do not support the EU's decision to respond to the US wham reports with whams. We do not support this because if the EU were to introduce whams for American products shipped to Europe, we would increase the price of American products purchased by European people coming to the European market. We would cause a serious price increase for European people. The European Commission has now put together a list of products that the EU could potentially buy whams for. So certain products that are brought here from the US could be bought whams for. If this were to happen, it would cause a price increase of 18 billion forints in Hungary. In the case of such products as contact lenses, leather shoes, or plastic bottles used for house construction. So the situation is that we do not want to see a price increase in Europe. We do not want the European economy to face even greater difficulties. We do not want the Hungarian people in Europe to have to pay more for certain products. So we do not support the EU introducing whams or exporting whams to the US, but we want the European Commission to discuss and reach an agreement with the United States on how to reduce whams and how not to import more and more whams. What I have to say here is that we only need a qualified majority for the importation of whams, so Hungary's vote is not sufficient. But there was a major country in the Council, the largest one, which, for example, initiated the importation of whams by the European Union in time. So the situation is that several EU countries are able to think rationally, and the result of this is that a wham exported by use causes a price increase for the European people. And let me say it again, if the EU adopted the whams that the European Commission is currently preparing, it would mean a price increase of 18 billion forints on the Hungarian market. I would also like to say that a completely new situation has clearly emerged in the world economy. It is certain that the competition will increase significantly on several fronts, and it will be even tougher than it has been so far. The competition will be even tougher for clothing, because as you can see, Donald Trump has set the goal for himself that as many whams as possible go to the United States. I would like to make a conclusion here. How many times have I, as the minister responsible for whams, listened to the critics of the opposition in terms of why factories, why assembly plants, why whams are being built in Hungary? Now, the goal in the United States is to bring such factories to the United States. So when the opposition is facing the critics who look down on the manufacturing industry, it would be worth thinking about how it is possible that in the United States, this is now an election-winning political strategy. So the point is that there will be more and more competition around the world for WAMs. This is why we need to take this as an opportunity to make some changes in the European Union, changes that should have been made a long time ago. For example, we need to allow member states to provide more clothing support from their own budget than they have done so far. Now, the European Commission needs to make improvements over 37.5 million euros so that we can provide clothing and assembly support from our own budget. In addition, the progress of the European Commission is often delayed for years. And of course, in a clothing competition, if we say to the clothing company, "My dear friend, we will provide you with this and that amount of clothing support," and 2 years later, it turns out that we can provide it. Well, this is not a competitive offer. So we are surprised that countries outside of Europe are able to provide this kind of clothing. So the European Commission has made a serious mistake in establishing such a situation between the United States and the European Union. Now we need strategic calm. We should not blame ourselves even more than we have done so far. We do not see the solution in introducing new VAMs, but in negotiating. And we do not vote against VAMs being introduced against the United States, because that would increase the price of certain products in the European and Hungarian markets, and we do not want more price increases. Here, I would like to reflect on a few articles that have been published in the media today in Hungary, which have been financed by David Pressman, USAID, or other American sources in recent years. Here they refer to a document that is the annual report of the trade representatives of the United States. This report is published every year on the basis of a law adopted in 1974. So to publish the annual report as if it were a part of a single presidential order is simply a lie. This report is published every year on the basis of a law adopted in 1974. This report, which has been quoted by some media today, was born under the Biden administration. Under the Biden administration, which viewed Hungary as an enemy. And this report was dictated by David Pressman, who referred to parts of Hungary. Parts of Hungary include the opinion of David Pressman, who was a former U.S. ambassador to Budapest. David Pressman's opinion is that he was an anti-activist and that he acted as the leader of the Hungarian opposition. How do we know all this? We know that during the compilation of this document, the reports could be submitted from September 3, 2024 to October 17, 2024. The election was held in November in the United States. In addition, the document states the sources of the reports. During the compilation of this report, the content information was provided by the United States embassies. From now on, I hope it is clear to everyone that this is a report born under the Biden administration, which contains the opinion of David Pressman, who refers to parts of Hungary. And now, China. Today is the second day of the EU-China trade cooperation. Unfortunately, I have to start with the fact that, under the leadership of the European Commission, Mr. von der Leyen is not fit for the task. Why am I saying all this? Because the best example of how an ideology-driven economic policy can cause great damage is the decision of the European Commission, which was used to expel the Chinese e-car industry players. And they did all this by insisting that they wanted to protect the European e-car industry, while the European e-car industry players were banned against the most sound-based rule of law. It has been reaffirmed again that political cooperation between companies in economic life should not be destroyed. Any kind of artificial political interference in the natural way of cooperation between companies can cause great damage. And it should be noted that there is no successful green transition in Europe without the economic cooperation with China. Simply because the European e-car industry was forced to switch to electronic basis. For this reason, European car manufacturers invested 10 or 100 billion euros in the development and transition to electronic basis. At the same time, it has also become clear that the European e-car industry cannot operate without Chinese imports. We do not have to go far enough to look at Hungary. Hungary is the only country in Europe where all three German premium car manufacturers are present, and they work with Eastern importers in the field of batteries. Large Chinese companies import large German companies. This is the situation today, and one of the best examples of this is Hungary, where large German and large Chinese factories are built together. For this reason, the decision of the European Commission to introduce VAMs to the Chinese e-car industry was practically a blow to the European car industry. It is no coincidence that large car manufacturers filed a lawsuit against the European Commission on the decision of the European Commission. We decided that the Hungarian government would take part in this lawsuit as a sponsor on the side of the car manufacturers. This is because the decision of the European Commission to introduce VAMs is a huge blow to the European car industry. We, as a car industry, do not want this, and we support car manufacturers to be successful against the decision of the European Commission.